And once again, very good evening to each one of you. All the viewers who have joined us, logged in this evening, live on YouTube, live on Facebook, live on Twitter, live on MMA, Voice of MMA, live on radio, and our own webcast. There's a lot of excitement among our people to listen to Professor this evening, and I think it's all about creating brand coolness, brand love, how to make your brand stronger. Now, before I request Mr. Balraman to introduce, quickly, I want to tell you about two more veterans we are going to be talking to us very soon. If you're all the Pons veterans who have joined us, warm welcome to you. Please kindly note the next event is happening on the 8th Saturday. Kannan is going to be talking to us. He's going to talk to us on Leader Speak series, consumer centricity and value and skincare, sportswear, smartphone, now to social sector. And he's a former mentor, MD of Adidas. I think we are looking forward to hearing him. And on the 10th, also we have Arun Mehra. He's going to be talking to us. You know, Arun Mehra is a former head of global, former head of planning commission. He was there, and also Boston Consulting Group. And he's going to be talking to us on COVID, the new normal, and governance. I want to share you, we already lined up for more than 20-25 events in the month of August. One more, which I want to really share with you, so not to be missed event, is post-pandemic world order. One of the outstanding speakers, Mr. Dr. Gurumurthy, chartered accountant, columnist, and political economic analyst in editor of Tuklak. He's going to be talking to us on the 17th of this month. So kindly join us. As usual, I also request all the viewers who are logged in, if you are on Zoom, please kindly send in your questions. Professor has kindly agreed to answer to all the questions which you raised. In between, after Professor will do his presentation for about an hour. Thereafter, we'll be in conversation for a few minutes with three distinguished special invitees whom we have this evening. Ms. Prabha Narasimhan, Executive Director of Hindustan Unilever. She's joined us from UK. And Mr. Kannan Sitaraman, Venture Partners, Fireside Ventures. And Mr. Neeraj Chandran, Business Advisor, Mentor and Coach. And once again, very warm welcome to each one of you. It's indeed a pleasure. Now, let me have the privilege of introducing my mentor, my guru, my past president of MMA, Mr. Balraman. Mr. Balraman is who is the force behind this Pons veteran, and we are indeed privileged, honored, blessed to go through this series, because there's so much of excitement among the members and viewers. We have already a large number of dedicated viewers who are watching this program live and keep looking forward to this week after week after. So I know when I was young, I used to watch the Saturday Night Fever. That movie used to be so much excitement. Today, the talk which you are organizing every Saturday becomes Saturday evening fever for the management professional to watch this event. Now, a brief introduction about Mr. Balraman. He doesn't need introduction. You all know him very well. He's an MBA from Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, BTech from Chennai Anna University. He has been a corporate directorship in a number of companies, and he's also working in a number of other activities, including speaker in several management seminars, conferences, devoted human development, created brand HR software companies called Adrenaline when he was there, and part of a number of companies. He enjoys coaching, mentoring, leadership, and helping build brands, consults, and marketing through boardroom advantage and many more activities. And it's always a pleasure to be interacting with Mr. Balraman, because his voice of wisdom every day makes us really bring out the best in MMA. And thanks to Mr. Raman for this as a past president. Over to you, Mr. Balraman, to introduce our distinguished speaker for this evening and also on the theme of the subject. Mr. Balraman.
Thank you, Group Captain. What is Brand Batra? Brand Batra is a deep analytical thinking, reflecting on consumers, reflecting on consumer behavior and brand behavior. Brand Batra started in IIM Ahmedabad like I did, but worked for some time in Pons, but did not stop there. He went on to join University of Michigan, and he did a doctorate in Stanford. And he has been teaching marketing in the Ross School of Business in University of Michigan. There is a lot that he wants to share with us. And he wanted about an hour, so I think it's important for us to give him his full hour. So over to you, Rajeev. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Balram. And it's a pleasure to be here with you all, very distinguished company. And let me bring my screen up, and then I'll begin my talking. Okay, Are you all able to see my
Yes,
PowerPoint
sir.
screen?
Yes, we
Yes,
are.
got it, sir.
All right, terrific. So today I'm going to share with all of you some of my research on relationships between consumers and brands, consumer brand relationships. And within that two specific areas, how you make a brand seem more cool and how you increase the love that consumers have for your brand. And by doing that, by doing both of those, you make your brand stronger. And that, of course, is a great thing from all kinds of management perspectives in terms of trial, purchase, repurchase, willingness to pay, etc. And if there's time, I'll get into another aspect as well. So just a second while I bring my cursor back here. So actually, it turns out Balram gave you my background, but my relationship with I guess Hindustan Lever or Unilever now goes back even before my IIM Ahmedabad days, and I think Balram didn't know this, but I actually joined Hindustan Lever before I joined IMA, straight up from college, from St. Stephen's College in Delhi, and I found in my files, my paper files, my initial letter in which Hindustan Lever hired me, and I scanned that in June the 2nd, 1975, where I was offered the job of management trainee at Hindustan Lever at the princely salary of 900 rupees a month. So this will date me, but this will give you a sense of my connection with the Pons Lever family. And then, as Balram mentioned, I left. I joined Lever very, very briefly in this role. Then I left to join IMA, and after IMA, I went to Pons, and after that, I went to eventually went to Stanford for my PhD and began my teaching career, first in Columbia University in New York, and then here in Michigan in Ross. So while at Pons, I managed a couple of brands. I managed Pons Cold Cream, Vaseline Petroleum Jelly, and Vaseline Hair Tonic, and so on. And when I left Pons, I was supposed to take over Dream Flower Talc, but I left at that time. So let me give you the bigger framework here for consumer brand relationships. Consumers form perceptions about a brand. These are based in part on what the brand does and says, but also, of course, especially these days, on communications from other sources, including what we call consumer to consumer communication. So that's social media and so on. And there's third-party PR and things like that. So we form perceptions about the brand, and we hope that consumers will like our brand as a result. And formally in academics, when we study that, we call that attitudes toward the brand. How positive are they? And then, of course, we hope that consumers will purchase the brand. And it's not identical, because you may sometimes like the brand but not purchase it. You may purchase it for brands other than liking, but usually those are related. And then after purchasing the brand, we have various managerial outcomes which we want to increase as managers: loyalty, advocacy, word of mouth, willingness to pay, WTP, and things like resistance to negative information, and so on. So this is the chain, if you will. Now, there's been a lot of work among academic researchers on this in this big picture context, and I'm not going to cover all the research that various people have done, obviously, but specifically, I'm looking at one type of perception, which is how cool people think the brand is, brand coolness, and whether beyond simply liking a brand, consumers say they love the brand, which is a qualitatively more intense positive relationship with the brand. And we've actually just begun some much more recent work, which if there's time I talk about, there may not be time, on a third piece, which we call pride of ownership. And how do you increase someone's pride of ownership in your brand when they own it? So again, you have all the same types of outcomes becoming even stronger. So if there's time, we'll get into that. Otherwise, I'll have to skip that. The Nike ad, which we opened this session with, is a terrific example of both brand love and brand coolness. In fact, in our research, it shows up as a brand that consumers love, as well as a brand that's perceived to be cool. And as we go through this deck, this presentation, I think you'll see why when you see the different pieces. And I'll call out Nike's where it stands and why it's loved and why it's cool as we go through this presentation as time permits. So obviously work that I'm going to share has been done with lots of co-authors and colleagues. I won't read all their names, but they're on the slide for attribution. There are colleagues at Michigan, colleagues all over the world. The brand coolness work, Sandra Lorero is in Lisbon, Nitika Garg is in in Sydney, and so on. So let me begin with the brand coolness piece. So when we think of coolness, we usually think of people that the world considers to be cool. And there's Beyonce, the music star at the top. There's Elon Musk and Tesla, very, very cool these days. If you've seen their stock price go up, it's just incredible. There's Beckham on the left, and then back from another era. Most of you may not recognize the face or get the reference, but James Dean, the movie actor from the 1950s, is there in the middle. So these are, people who at various times have been considered extremely cool. And among brands go up and down in terms of coolness. There was a time, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago when Facebook was very, very cool. Today, with 3 billion users across the world, with parents and grandparents among its members, perhaps it's not seen as being equally cool. Instagram is very cool. Snapchat was very cool. And these days, I'm hearing less about Snapchat. It's sort of becoming more in the background. TikTok is very cool around the world. And of course, now it has this political hot water that it is in. Then in sports brand, you see Nike there. Nike has been very cool for a very, very long time, remains so. And I guess we have in the audience the former MD of Adidas. So I'm not going to say that Adidas is not cool. It also shows up in the list of brands that's very cool. And then Under Armour is a brand which in recent years has been gaining in coolness, but it's in a lot of financial trouble these days, as you may be reading. So being cool or not being cool impacts how much a brand sells and how profitable the brand is. And I think the classic brand to talk about is Levi's. When I was growing up in India, Levi's was a very, very cool brand. And when I came to the United States and began teaching branding, Levi's, in fact, had something like a 30% market share in the US jeans market. But over the years, that's declined massively because Levi's was no longer cool among young people. And the market share of Levi's, in fact, dropped to something like 5% from that 30%. In contrast, other brands obviously have gained in sales and coolness. And the brands it competes with even go outside the jeans category. In fact, Lululemon, which is, I'm not sure how much you know about that brand, but it's this leisure wear that people are now wearing in place of jeans. And Lululemon is a very cool brand with high share and volume and profitability and so on. So being cool, becoming cool, and then losing coolness matters a lot in terms of business outcomes. And so clearly as managers, we need to understand what is behind this phenomenon so that we can diagnose where your brand is and try to do something about it. So that's what got me interested in studying this topic. For so many years, I've been saying, everybody talks about brand coolness, but I don't really understand what makes a brand cool. How come nobody's actually studied that? So that was the trigger behind this research project that me and my colleagues started many, many years ago, which came to fruition recently. We published this paper in 2019, last year. So what makes brands cool? And that was the question, what makes brands cool? Because there's been some work on what makes people cool, but it's not quite the same thing. There are lots of practitioner books. If you go and look at Amazon and type in cool, you'll see books like Cool Hunting and Chasing Cool and so on. But they're not very solid books. They have some good ideas. And then in terms of the academic research, certain what we call single domain research has been done. For example, tech products, what makes them cool. But nothing large scale or systematic in terms of brands overall. And no one has come up with a scale that you can actually use to measure how cool or not your brand is on the different pieces or components of coolness. And that was a major outcome of our work. So how did we start? Well, one of my co-authors on this project was Caleb Warren, and he'd done a previous paper on coolness, not on brands as much as people, but excuse me. His definition, which we started from, is that coolness it's a subjective and dynamic positive trait attributed to cultural objects like brands, but it's socially constructed. So a brand is seen as cool because people say it's cool. It's subjective because different people have different perceptions and assessments. And it's dynamic, it changes over time, but it's positive. If something is seen as cool, you want to be associated with it. If you own a cool object, you become more cool among the people that you relate to, and so on. So coolness is in the eye of the consumer. And so our question became, what perceptions does a brand need to have to be seen as being cool by consumers? So obviously in research, you first look at what other people have done because you don't want to reinvent the wheel. So we looked at what was there in the literature, and most of this dealt with coolness in people, as I mentioned earlier. So the types of characteristics that had been found or stated to be contributing to coolness in people were characteristics such as these: competence, especially cultural competence; social status. Now, it's not clear whether status made you cool or whether status is a consequence of being seen as cool. So that's an open question. Autonomy. People are seen as cool if they are seen as people who do their own thing. People who are on the fringe in terms of subcultures. So you go back to hippies and Harley Davidson outlaw bikers and bohemians and beats and so on. People in the mainstream are not seen as cool. People on the fringe are seen as more cool. If you are seen as contrarian and rebellious and controversial, that makes you cool. But there's a limit to this. It's very interesting that in our research as well, we found that rebelliousness by itself doesn't make you cool, and there are limits to how much it helps. And being rebellious makes you cool only if you actually meet many other criteria. So by itself, it's sort of limited. Being novel, original, and unique. Being true to your own roots. And the word now that's very big in marketing, I'm sure you've all heard this, is authenticity, being authentic. That's very important. And then the literature splits. Some people say that people are seen as being more cool if they are detached. And literally cool means you're not hot, you're not warm, you know, you're sort of concealed in terms of your emotional state. On the other hand, people say you're more cool if you are exciting, you're youthful, if there's a hedonistic impulse that you display. If you're popular, that makes you cooler, and so on. So that's sort of the literature on coolness in people. And then on products, not just brands, people have talked about aesthetic appeal. And one reason why Apple and even Nike is seen as being cool is because of the design, the visual element of their products and their communications. And then we have this element, which is products that are super useful. And it's important to underline the super, extraordinary, because it comes out in our research as well. So not just minor improvements above the category average, but something way out there. So like Tesla, you know, because it's such a break from the conventional automotive product, that's sort of what makes it a very cool product. So our questions in this research project, when we started this, and by the way, we started this project, it must have been maybe 6 years ago. It took a long time to come to fruition. What are the features that are used by people to make this judgment about coolness for brands? And we call it a prototype, because a prototype means the presence of certain features makes it seem cool. The absence of those features takes away from it as being seen as cool. How are these features structured? How do they relate to each other? Are they all separate, independent factors, or do they somehow relate to each other? And I'll show you a graphic to explain what I mean by structure. Can we come up with a measurement scale for these different pieces? And can we come up with a validated measurement scale? Now, This is not a trivial undertaking. In academics, when you talk of validated, there's a lot of very formal tests you have to go through to prove that it measures what you say it measures, and it measures only what you say it measures. What leads to coolness? What are the antecedents, the drivers of coolness? And what are the consequences of coolness? Can you place coolness in the middle of the structure and then draw arrows? What goes into it? What comes out of it? And then can we actually experimentally show that you can actually increase perceptions of coolness by by saying something about a brand, which makes people change their judgments of how cool it is. And that's an important test in academics, because experiments are the only way to show a causal relationship. So if I take raw data from the marketplace, I can show relationships, but it's hard to say what leads to what. But in an experiment, you can actually make that claim and that proof. That's the only way to do that. And how does this change over time? Do brands increase in coolness, decrease in coolness? What is the framework to think of changes over time? So those were the questions. And, as I said, we began by looking at the literature, but then we did qualitative research. You cannot jump into quantitative survey-based kinds of studies without doing grounded research, qualitative research. So we did both in Europe and the United States, lots of different countries, lots of focus groups, depth interviews. We had people write essays on what they thought made some brands cool versus not. And we analyzed all of this raw data in informal, structured ways. And we found 10 pieces, 10 components, and you see them on the right of that graphic. So these are shorthand words: original, novel, authentic, doing your own thing, rebellious, which is sort of obvious, it's linked to a subculture, not the mainstream, high status, having high status, being aesthetically appealing, having a high sense of energy and dynamism. In terms of quality, being totally extraordinary, beyond the normal level. And then iconic, which means having some cultural symbolism. And then popular. Now, this doesn't mean that every brand which is seen as cool has all of these, but it needs to have some of these. And if you don't have any of these, it's unlikely that your brand will be seen as cool. And I'll be explaining all of these in just a minute. I'll be showing you the scales and what this means at the operational level in just a few minutes. I want to mention that while we did our research, both in Europe and the United States, there were some factors which appeared in Europe that did not show up in the United States. So in Europe, socially responsible was something that consumers mentioned to us, but this was not played back to us in our American research. So it's entirely possible that coolness changes across cultures. So what may be cool in India may be different than what I'm going to show you. And that's something that researchers have to look at. We also found that, in fact, being scarce and rare was not something which empirically was one of the pieces that made a brand cool, which sort of surprised us, but that's what we found in our data. So I mentioned the structural model. This is what a structural model looks like. And the names of these pieces change a little bit because we had lots of research over many years. But you can see that the individual pieces, such as super usefulness, energetic, aesthetic appeal, original, authentic, and so on, are not separate pieces. Many of these combine into what we call higher order pieces or factors. So being original and authentic both combine into something we label positive autonomy. Being energetic and aesthetic appeal and super useful combined into something we call desirable or value. So this gives you a sense of what we call the structural model, the higher order model. Now, I'll tell you how we did all this. So from the qualitative research, we then did survey research. We did actually 8 studies in both Europe and the United States with large samples of people. And for each of these samples of people, we said, you pick a brand which you think is cool. And could you please rate the brand on all these different adjectives? So we had these scales that we came up with. I forget how many there were 70, 80 scales. And then we also said, can you rate a brand that you think is not cool on these same scales? And then we analyzed these data through formal analytical techniques, which is called structural modeling. And that's how we came up with this structure. So in an operational sense, what is the scale? What are these pieces? What is the valid scale which we came up with? So imagine you saw a survey instrument, a questionnaire, which showed you a brand, Adidas, Nike, whatever, and you had to rate it on a scale of agree, disagree, 1 to 5. And the question was, to what extent do you think the brand is innovative, is original, does its own thing? That's the originality piece. Is authentic, true to its roots, doesn't seem artificial, doesn't try to be something it's not, that's authentic. Is rebellious, is defiant, not afraid to break rules, non-conformist. Then the subcultural piece is makes people who use it different from other people. If I use it, I would be different, I would stand apart. Helps people who use it stand apart from the crowd. People who use it are unique. Iconic is a cultural symbol. Extraordinary is superb, exceptional, fantastic, extraordinary, sort of like a wow factor. Energetic is energetic, outgoing, lively, vigorous. Aesthetic appeal, looks good, aesthetically appealing, attractive. High status, chic, glamorous, ritzy, sophisticated. Popular, liked by most people, in style, popular, widely accepted. So these are the measures. And you take these items, you average them per dimension or per factor, and you get the number for that. And then we compare this. We compare this for brands that are rated to be cool versus not cool. And we use these ratings to predict the outcomes that we are interested in. Does it predict word of mouth? Does it predict willingness to pay? And the answers to all of those questions are yes, it does those things. So in terms of prediction, it predicts brand liking, it predicts willingness to pay, it predicts word of mouth. And it also predicts as a mediator. In other words, the effect goes through brand love, which I'll talk about next, as well as what is called the connection between yourself and the brand. And in terms of how well it predicts, there's a measure of strength of the relationship called R squared in regression. You may be familiar with that. And 32 to 72% of the outcome is explained by coolness. And so the outcomes are more positive attitude, willing to pay more money, more likely to talk about the brand, more likely to love the cool brand, and feel more connected with the cool brand. So in terms of the managerial outcomes, it has a huge impact. So then I mentioned this lab experiment. So we actually said to people, there's a watch, which is called VOSS, V-O-S-S, fictitious watch. And then we gave them a couple of paragraphs to read about the watch, and we changed the wording of what we gave them in that paragraph to shape their perceptions of coolness. So we described it as a brand that was rebellious versus not, high status versus not, and so on. And you can see in the first row of data called coolness, how the people who were given the high manipulation had higher numbers on overall coolness than the people that were given the low number. So this was the causal experimental manipulation. And what this basically means is we proved that a marketing person, marketing company, through the messaging, can in fact increase perceptions of these pieces and therefore of overall coolness of a certain brand, and so hopefully lead to the increased market outcomes. So then when we were doing this research, we go through what is called a review process when other people read our paper, our manuscript, and very critically evaluate it and give suggestions or requests for further change. So in that process, somebody said to us, you know, you've done a lot of good stuff here, but you haven't really looked at how brands change in coolness over time. Can you do that? So that became very challenging and hard to do. But eventually, we found this online community. Some of you may know about it. It's called Reddit, R-E-D-T-I-T. And people join that. These are experts in certain areas. They're called subreddits. And so there was an online community dealing with urban streetwear. So these are clothes that people wear on the street, fashion streetwear. And we went to them and we said, here's how we think of brands which are not cool, niche cool. In other words, that experts like you think that they're cool, but the mass market does not. And then brands that are mass cool. They are cool to the general population, but not cool to people like you. Not necessarily cool to people like you. Can you think of brands that fit each of these definitions? So people came up with brands. So a brand that was not cool was Gap or Skechers. This is the US brand, so obviously the Indian context is different. Supreme is a fashion brand that to us we thought was pretty cool, but they said, no, that's mass cool. It's not niche cool anymore. And Nike is a brand that was mass cool. And then there were some brands that we had never heard of, brands called Steady Hands and CE, which they gave to us as examples of niche cool brands. So we said, fine, you've given us examples of these brands in your judgment. Now, can you rate each of these brands on our 10 factors as well as the outcomes? So originality. And so they rated the brands on the scales for originality, authentic, rebellious, etc., the 10 pieces. And then they also rated the brands on brand love and word of mouth and willingness to pay, etc. And that's the right table. The left table is those 10 pieces. And very interesting patterns emerged. So brands that were seen as uncool were pretty much low, as they should be, on all those 10 pieces. Brands that were niche cool were rated higher than brands that were mass cool on being original. These are the numbers in red. Original, authentic, rebellious, subcultural, also extraordinary. But then when you got to things like popular, in fact, the mass cool brands were rated higher, which makes sense. They are mass brands, they're more popular. They're more culturally symbolic. Everybody thinks of Disney and Nike, so the iconic scaling is higher. Status, both have about equal numbers. Aesthetic, again, niche is higher, but mass is also pretty high. Energetic, niche is a little bit higher than mass. And extraordinary, niche is higher than mass, but mass is also pretty high. So that's a very interesting pattern. And then in terms of consequences, the niche cool brands were, in the eyes of these experts, were rated higher on liking and attitudes, higher on brand love, higher on self-brand connection. Word of mouth, in fact, the question was, do people talk about these brands? Do you talk about these brands? The mass cool brands were rated even higher than the niche cool brands. Willingness to pay, higher for niche, but also pretty high for mass. Price premium, that's very interesting. The mass cool brands were rated even higher. So the mass brands are often priced higher in the mass marketplace. Naturally, if they're mass, the familiarity to other consumers is higher, and they have more exposure. Everybody's talking about them. People know them. So the brand exposure number was higher. So these numbers made sense. So we came up with this framework for changes in brand coolness over time. So let's say a brand starts out as being not cool, uncool. Then if it becomes if it's adopted by a subculture, then it becomes niche cool. And if it's niche cool, it's cool within a small in-group or outside a subculture. These brands are perceived to be relatively higher in rebellious, original, authentic, subcultural, extraordinary, aesthetic appealing, energy, and high status. As a result, consumers within the subculture have strong connections with these brands, feel strong love for them, positive attitudes, willingness to pay a lot, and so on. Then the brand may or may not, it doesn't have to happen, spread to the masses, becomes mass cool. And so they retain many of these positive attributes, high energy, high status, more popular, more iconic, but they go down a little bit in terms of rebellious, subcultural, authentic, original, and so on. And so mass cool brands have high familiarity, get more exposure, more word of mouth, more price premium, and so on, become market leaders. And then it's possible, if they become too mass, and if they're not managed well, they can lose their cool and become undifferentiated and normal and less cool. And so then they become an uncool brand. So that's sort of the cycle that brands could go through. It's not inevitable, but that's quite possible. So what are the managerial implications? I think the first contribution, the first thing that you all can do as managers is use the scale to measure and evaluate your brand's current level of coolness versus your key competitive brands, not just at an overall, is the brand cool or not, that kind of scale, but at the component level, at the 10 pieces, so that you can then figure out where you have strengths and weaknesses that you may need to act on to improve overall brand coolness. So, for instance, if you are weak in original, then clearly you need to design products and communications that are more original, as Apple does. If you are seen as not being authentic, well, tell people about your history and values, like Patagonia does. If you are not seen as iconic, link yourself to certain key cultural values, like Disney. Energetic comes from continuous innovation. Samsung is a brand that came up many times in our data. Aesthetic appeal. The more recent products of Nike and so on are eye-popping design. So products, communications, retail spaces. And then high status comes, among other things, from premium pricing, as well as co-branding and partnerships and so on. If you are seen as not being rebellious enough, then hire a spokesperson who is seen as rebellious. And this is where Nike, the example, comes up. So you saw that that clip of the recent ad that they just started running, and one of their spokespeople is Colin Kaepernick, who was a quarterback in the National Football League, but was fired because he took this defiant stance towards, Black Lives Matter and so on. He took the knee on the field before playing the game, and it was very controversial. But he had certain values he stood for. And Nike is very interesting. Ever from day one, they always choose athletes as spokespeople who are not just champion athletes, but who have a certain rebelliousness to them. And those of you old enough may remember people like Andre Agassi or even Michael Jordan, who were people who defied convention. Nike has always been about defying convention, doing your own thing. And Nike therefore has this rebellious persona, which really makes them very attractive to their key teenage heavy buyer market, people who buy lots of athletic footwear. Then you have subcultural connections like Harley Davidson with its rallies for these bikers. Extraordinary is the super innovation in terms of quality and usefulness. So all these products like Alexa or Tesla and so on. And then popular, of course, is being visible and linked with very well-known celebrities. So all these influencer marketing campaigns on Instagram and YouTube make the brand seem trendy and fashionable. That's how you gain in popularity. And a brand, brand like Glossier on the left, which has become a cosmetics brand, become very popular now. So all these the recent what are called direct-to-consumer brands have played this game to increase their coolness among their target consumers. And then, of course, finally, we have this life cycle that brands can go through. And this requires management attention. Do you want to make your niche cool brand a mass cool brand? There are pluses and minuses. You may decide not to do that. If it's a mass cool brand, how do you make sure you maintain the mass coolness and not become a non-cool brand? So this is part of the management challenge that brands face. And then the next piece is brand love. But I'm going to pause here and stop for questions on brand coolness before we get to the second piece on brand love. So I'm wondering if there are any questions that anybody has, the panelists perhaps, or anyone else.
Rajeev, I do have one question. Can you hear me, Rajeev?
Yes, I can. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So, I like the way you defined coolness. I'm just wondering, I grew up on brands which, when I was working on them, were not young. They still continue to do very well. They are not considered cool. I'm just wondering two things, therefore. Is coolness something which tends to be short-lived? You talked about Levi's, Facebook. I can remember Benetton. Is this, therefore, actually a more dangerous sort of brand strategy? Second, does coolness really create more value for its owner, for the brand owner?
Okay, so let me deal with both questions. The first question is it inevitably short-lived? The answer is no. If the brand is well managed and if the brand continuously links itself with the right attributes. So, for example, Nike, Nike is not a super young brand. It's probably 40 years old. I forget when Phil Knight started Nike. But Nike has continuously linked itself with symbols, with spokespeople who have this rebellious persona, which changes over time. The people, John McEnroe and Andre Agassi at one time, and then, as I mentioned, Michael Jordan. So they've always done that. So they look around in culture and they see who are the people who have this edginess to them that they then link themselves to. And therefore they've maintained this. Now, if you don't pay attention to this, then yes, it can decline. So it does require being aware of what's going on around you and an active management of the coolness. And with Levi's, they just missed the whole popular culture revolution with hip hop and rap and all that stuff. And they just became, a father's and a grandfather's brand. Young people just didn't see Levi's as cool anymore. So that's my answer to your first question. I don't think it can be short-lived, but it need not be short-lived. It certainly requires much more conscious management attention. So that's my answer to your first question. And now I've forgotten what the second question was.
The second one was, is it profitable? Does it create more value for the brand owner?
Yeah, so this is where the management question comes in. So a niche cool brand can be very profitable, but with smaller volumes because it's niche cool. If you choose to make your brand, transition it to mass cool, the volumes obviously go up. But the coolness can diminish. So it's almost like a sort of you have to multiply the margin times volume and figure out which one makes most sense for you. But it's certainly possible. Like Nike is a fantastic example. I mean, Nike is a brand, and I'm sure Adidas too in many, many markets. But Nike is a brand which has maintained its coolness and yet is a huge, massive brand. So it is possible. I mean, the market share numbers depend on the market, geographical market, and category and so on. But Nike is something like in the US, it's I think a 38% market share or something like that. So you can be a mass brand with coolness, with high margins. It all comes down to the strength of the management. I think that's how I would answer that question.
Okay, thank you.
So thanks for asking.
Rajeev, if I could maybe build from there with a question that is focused on an India type context. Do you think, given the number of consumers who are not very well off in this country, do you think coolness is an attribute that is meant only for the rich, or when you're targeting rich consumers, or is there value to it across the board?
That's a great question. No, I don't think it's an attribute just for the rich. It depends so much on the category. So there could be categories which are within the mass price range that hundreds of millions of people purchase. Either it could be in clothing, it could be in not frequently moving FMCG products and so on. So I think it could. So my short answer is no. It doesn't. It's not entirely for the rich at all. The status and glamour and expensiveness piece is only one of 10 pieces. And you can certainly have brands that are not super expensive that are very cool.
Thanks.
Sure.
Neeraj, you have a question before he continues?
Yes, Mr. Neeraj is there, sir. Shankar, can you bring
Professor
Neeraj
Batra
online, please?
is going to continue for another half an hour. So this is only an interim question.
Right. Should I move on, Balram?
Yeah, go on.
Okay. All right. So I'll talk now about the brand love piece. Now we know that there are some consumers that some brands that consumers really love, and the prototypical example is brands that appear as tattoos on people's bodies. This is Apple. People know of Harley Davidson, which is done frequently, and so on. So clearly there's a level of relationship that some brands have with some consumers which go beyond the normal level of relationship. And many brands seek to build this kind of relationship. And you see the word love used in many marketing campaigns. McDonald's has had this for many years in their global campaign. You can see the illustrations of McDonald's campaigns in Germany and the UK, and even in India, they've used this a little bit. I did a Google search, and most of the McDonald's ads in India were very price and product focused, but I did find a few that talked about love. But that's a global campaign for many years now. And so the question is, what is brand love? Marketers talk about brand love, but again, no one's cracked this. So brands like Harley Davidson and Coke and Apple and Starbucks and so on. So some practitioners have written some books on this. So there's a brand called the Love Marks, written by, I think, I forget the name, an advertising guy. But it's really not clear. And we know it's more than liking. So when you say you love a brand, it's more than I just like the brand. And there are brands that care a lot about brand love. Coca-Cola has one of their key brand metrics as brand love. And there are obvious implications. You would think that if consumers love your brand, there's higher loyalty, you can charge a higher price, you're going to get more word of mouth and advocacy and so on. So it's very important, but how you make it happen has not been cracked. So we, by the way, in the work that I'm going to show you, did show that if you want to predict things like repurchase intentions, positive word of mouth, and so on, that brand love is a much stronger predictor of these outcomes than is simple quality. And in fact, after we published our work in 2012, somebody else looked at something like 300 studies almost, 46 countries and so on. And they found that brand love is far and away the strongest, best predictor of brand loyalty. So it is something that matters a lot. So how did we do this? Again, we began by qualitative work. And we didn't even begin with brands. We talked to a small sample of consumers. We said, tell us about things that you love to do. It might be dancing. It might be listening to music or buying clothes. That was study one. And in study two, tell us about brands that you love. And it might be Apple or Victoria's Secret. And then we said, these were depth interviews, focus groups, things like that. And then we said, write these things down in three types of cards, or just cards, and then place the cards into three piles. Pile one is, I love this. Pile two is, I don't love this. And then there's sort of a middle pile. And then we said, why did you place Apple or music or dancing in the pile that you love? What is it that makes you love it? And people talked about that. So we took this qualitative data, we found out the themes that were coming up. And then from these themes, we created measures, quantitative measures, scales, which we then used in surveys, large sample surveys. And then we analyzed those survey data. And again, we did our structural analysis. So what types of scales did we find, did we use that came up from the qualitative data? So one of them was a category that we called passion-driven behavior. So people said, when I love something, I have this intense craving for it. I find myself really desiring it and wanting to use it. I really want to spend, and I'm willing to spend a lot of time and money and energy fine-tuning this to make it exactly fit me. I find that I do lots of things with it all the time. I interact with it very frequently in the past and currently and in the future. So we call that passion-driven behaviors. The second group was people say, this brand or this activity is an important part of who I am. It says something about me. We call that current self-identity. People said, it makes me look like what I want to look like to others. It makes me feel like what I want to feel like. So we call that desired self-identity. Third, it gives my life some meaning. This quality of the brand, this attribute of the brand is inherently important on its own. I buy the brand not because of what it does for me, but because of what the brand means to me. And then people said, I talk and think about the brand frequently. So we call that attitude strength. The third group was, I just have positive feelings. There's pleasure, there's fun, excitement, and so on. When I use it, think about it. Then people said, the brand feels like an old friend. I feel connected to it. I feel a bond, emotional attachment. The brand feels right. It just feels like it fits me naturally, sense of intuitive fit. And then we have, I have a long-term relationship with the brand. I've used it for a long time. I will use it for a long time. If I were to lose the brand, it would be terrible. I worry a lot about losing the brand. That's what psychologists call anticipated distress. Then there's overall liking and so on. So these were the pieces, and we did the same kind of structural modeling. So this is how they relate to each other. Some of these pieces combine into higher level pieces. So what we call positive emotional connection on the bottom left side contains within it the intuitive fit, emotional attachment, and positive affect pieces, and so on. So, by the way, we had, when we did these measures, we had consumers rate both brands which they loved as well as didn't love. So we could compare these averages and structures. So this is how, let me go back one slide. This is a prettier picture of brand love. And you can see these higher order pieces. So positive emotional connection is top right. Self-integration is right there in the middle, and so on. And when we did our, let me go back. Sorry, I'm jumping around here. When we came up with our overall measures and the structure, we then said, how well does it predict things like loyalty, word of mouth, and so on, the managerial outcomes on the right-hand side of this graphic. And again, there was very high predictive ability, much more than just if you had a one-item scale, like overall, do you love the brand? Knowing the level to which the brand scored on all these pieces made the prediction much stronger. And obviously, from a diagnostic perspective, it's very helpful to have this diagnosis, because then I can say if my brand is not loved, why is it not loved? What's going on? Where is it weak? What do I need to do to increase brand love for my brand and thereby increase these outcomes on the right-hand side? And these are the scales. I won't read through all this. So if you're interested, I can send the paper which has these measures in them. But for example, the scales on current self-identity, this is the top left. The scale would be, it says something about who you are, and it would be a 1 to 5, 1 to 7 scale of agree, disagree. Others who see you using this brand get a sense of who you are. That kind of measure is what is used to measure this. And our measures we showed were very valid in a formal statistical sense. It measured exactly what it was trying to measure, and it didn't overlap with other measures. So managerial implications, what do you do with this? Obviously the question, the goal is to increase the love for your brand. So, so I see somebody raised a hand and I can't see that. Can the moderator, can you see who raised a hand and somebody has a question?
Yeah, hello.
You can go ahead, sir. We'll take the question at the end of the session, sir.
Okay, we'll take the question when I pause next. So the
Yes,
managerial
yes,
implication,
yes.
the managerial implication obviously is, you know, to increase brand love. So can you do something to increase the extent to which the consumer has this level of passion for the brand? Through the design and the packaging, can you increase this visceral hunger to use the brand, touch the brand? Can you increase the need to invest time and resources and interact frequently with the brand? This is really interesting. People said, I love the brand if I have to spend time and resources to customize it. In fact, I want to spend time and resources to customize it. So can you do something to require personalization? So the moment somebody buys it, they have to go in to use it, they have to personalize it. And by investing themselves in it through the act of personalization, that increases the level of brand love. So maybe you sell a piece of hardware and there's a software layer on top. Can you make it necessary for the person to go in and customize that software? that would increase brand love. So those are examples of actual managerial steps you can take. Can you increase the linkage of the brand to deeper meanings and life values? Link it to social responsibility or frugality. There's a lot of talk these days about brand purpose. And can you link the brand to something more meaningful that gives the brand this linkage to deeper meanings and important values? Can you make the brand feel like an old friend? Can you talk about the culture of the brand, the people behind the brand, the story behind the brand? Give it the sense of history, tradition. That's how you increase this positive emotional connection. Can you become a trusted resource that people look to you for solutions, so that if the brand is no longer there, they're going to really miss it? And there are examples in the on the slide. Can you build this long-term interactive relationship? Everyone these days talks of engagement. So can you make it easier for consumers to interact frequently, not just get to your Facebook page and click a like, but actually post something frequently? That is something that would increase this degree of behavioral interaction with the brand over time. And it's very interesting that, excuse me, in our research, Apple far and away appears as the brand that consumers love the highest. And if you think about it, why is that? Well, Apple products have incredible design. And I don't just mean physical design, but also the whole user experience is so fantastic that the desire to touch it, use it is very strong. Second, you don't use an Apple product, and this is true, of course, of all, not just Apple smartphones, but all smartphones. And that's why we feel so close to all our smartphones, is that you have to personalize it. You have to decide which apps to download. You use it so frequently. That's putting in your sense of self into the product. And then think of how you create the music, the playlists and the music you download into these smartphones. Music is something so individual. It reflects your identity. The pieces of music you like say something about who you are, your value, your passions. And so the sense of self gets so invested into this product and these apps. So that's why I think that smartphones and Apple and so on appear so high in this list of products and brands that consumers love. Now, I'm often asked, can you actually increase brand love for mundane, daily, low-priced products? And maybe it's less so than, more expensive products. But, I think of the Indian brand Amul, which is low price, frequently consumed. But I dare say, I bet you if you did research that most Indian consumers would say they really love the Amul brand. And I think that's a great example of how even a low price product can build up this high level of brand love. And maybe we'll talk about this some more when we get to the Q&A. So 2017, we did a follow-up study because a lot of people said to us, your scales are very nice, but they're too many. And we really can't use so many scales in a commercial context. So we did a follow-up study, which had some other objectives, but essentially came up with a smaller number of scales for our factors. So here are examples of the scales we came up for: current self-identity, desired self-identity, and so on. And we were able to show that by using a smaller number of scales, you still were able to get very meaningful comparisons across brands. So these are 3 clothing brands, and imagine that brand 1, which is called Aeropostale, is in the center with an average score of 0. So you sort of normalize the numbers. The other brands in the spider diagram are in the blue and the black. And you can see that the other brands are higher than this main brand on many of these brand love components. And it turned out, in fact, that this brand, in fact, went out of business a little bit later. So this shows that there are business consequences to not having high brand love when your competitors do have high brand love. And then last year, we were actually engaged by a smartphone brand, one of the biggest in the world. I can't tell you which brand. It's a brand that competes with Apple, but is not Apple. And they said, everybody loves Apple. Can you tell us what we need to do to increase our brand love so we become more like Apple. And they said, in particular, we are concerned about a certain demographic. So what we did is we actually went in and did qualitative research, talked to consumers in many demographics, find out what makes them love or not love their brand of smartphone. And we came up with some extra factors which were not in our initial factors that I just shared with you. They were sort of unique to this category and this demographic. And then we were able to see whether it mattered in terms of predicting brand loyalty. And in fact, it massively was important. So you can see that 66% of the variation in brand loyalty to this brand was explained by the presence or absence, the degree of overall brand love. And we were able to look at the different demographics. So for instance, the Gen Z 13 to 18 females, we could actually see that a certain factor that we call brand impression, which was this brand makes me look cooler, nicer among my friends. That's why I love it. This brand creates a good impression on other people. That's why I love it. That was the one thing on which this brand was way behind Apple. And so this gave the brand a managerial direction. Therefore, this is what you need to increase, and think of tactics now. And we gave them some ideas on tactics to improve this factor. So that's how we do work on brand love. And I'm going to pause again now to take questions.
Hi, Rajiv. This is Neeraj Chandra here.
Hi, Neeraj.
I think it's a fascinating...
Professor Batra is continuing beyond this. So this is a...
No. I'm going to stop here. Balaram, let me stop here, take questions on brand love first.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Go ahead, Neeraj.
Yeah. Go ahead, please, Neeraj.
Yeah. This is really fascinating. And it's really a seminal stream of work. And what I find is that you have made coolness become so much more tangible and so much more multidimensional. Often coolness was associated with brands where conversations veered around a Nike or something of the kind. But this seems to be as applicable to brands like, let's say, Fair and Lovely, or whatever it's called now. Or even in the context of something like a bank or a hospital.
Right.
Where some of the fundamental thinking seems to be in that direction. And I don't know whether you think it is right or not. The other thing which strikes me here is that is this kind of thinking extendable to B2B context, which many of us often have businesses in?
So let me speak to the first question. Yes, I think the main goal that we had in both these projects, and Balaram mentioned my career with Ponds many years ago, decades ago. I've always had an interest in research which has managerial implications. And to me, the question always was, we throw these words around as marketers, brand love, brand coolness, but what the heck is it? And how do you drill down to what pieces are creating or not brand coolness and brand love? So that exactly was the goal of the research. And thank you for saying it's impactful and useful. Now, to your second question, yes, certainly. I think for B2B and maybe for services, and there are many other contexts. There are different products and service categories, or it may be cultures where people would need to look afresh at other factors that may be present, and some of our factors may not be present in those contexts. So like I mentioned in that smartphone company example, that the work that we did, you might find something new that actually matters in different contexts like B2B. And so I cannot, predict what those factors might be. You'd have to do ground up qualitative research to uncover those factors. So in B2B, for example, I'm sure that reliability and dependability and trustworthiness is a huge component. Because if you're linking yourself to a brand for the long term in an expensive B2B relationship, you want a brand you can depend on. And so that has to be a huge part. In fact, we've done some other work in which there's a very strong relationship between brand love and brand trust. So I suspect that would be very, very strong in the B2B, as would innovation. I think that would be another big part in the B2B context.
I think the paradigm of coolness would hold, but the structure, what contributes to it may be very different. That's what I'm hearing you say, that they may have individual streams.
I don't know. I wouldn't. certainly it would be different, whether it's very different or slightly different, we'd have to do the research to show that.
Sure. Thanks, Rajeev.
Yeah, sure, thank you.
So if I may ask the next question, going back to the coolness, and Rajeev, it was clear that there's obviously a very high correlation between cool brands and revenue and profit. In the course of your research, in striving to be cool, did you find any standard mistakes that brands tend to make in their effort to try to be cool?
No, we didn't drill down into specific case studies, Prabha. So I think the short answer is no. The long answer is, I think if you look at the piece of the work in which we looked at niche brands and mass brands and uncool brands and the factors, you can get some inkling of what is it that brands lose, what do they go down on when their perceptions of coolness erode. So from that, you can draw inferences on what types of mistakes they make.
And sorry, what do they go down on?
Yeah, so if you recall, we had the slides on which we compared niche cool brands and mass cool brands and uncool brands on our 10 factors. And you could see the scores, the average scores of mass cool and uncool and niche cool on those 10 factors. So when a brand goes down on one of the key factors, it's making that kind of mistake. It's losing the perception on that factor. So while I don't have case studies to share with you, one can dig into that and say, so why is this brand seeming now to be less authentic or less rebellious or less innovative, whatever. So if a brand stops innovating and joins the crowd in terms of the quality level, then it would lose its sense of coolness, as an example.
Yep, clear. Thank you.
Shilpa, are you there? Shilpa?
There was a raised hand from Krishna, I believe, during the talk.
Yeah. Hello.
Is
somebody muted? Is somebody unable to talk? Maybe it appears in the chat. I don't know.
No, sir, unless the name is familiar, we don't open them, sir.
Vijay,
unless,
Vijay,
security reasons.
Hello, Vijay Shilpa Sitaram, please unmute that.
Yeah. Hey, listen, hey, Shilpa Sitaraman is there. Shankar, could you please check? May I request Shilpa sir, please raise your hand.
I give permission to Shilpa ma'am.
Please, Shilpa madam, please go ahead with your question.
Hi. Yeah, hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, I was not able to unmute myself earlier, but thanks for the great insights.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the amazing insights that have been super helpful. So I just had a question about brand love, because, I've worked on some like love mark brands like you were talking about. And, a lot of these love mark brands tend to do a lot of emotional connect with their target audience, because they have this, like you said, they have this love amongst people who use the brand, or maybe not even use the brand, like you said. But what is your take on like these love mark brands doing, say, like performance marketing, especially during, a crisis like this, when you may be just looking for like a quick volume or value number, and you may not necessarily have the means to have that emotional connect with your brands?
Can you give me an example of what you mean by performance marketing?
Well, something like a simple percent off that you're willing to give, rather than
promotions and activation.
Yeah, like a promotion activation, rather than trying to really engage with your consumers.
Well, every brand has to make continuously an allocation decision in spending behind activation / promotion and quote unquote brand building. Times change. So if consumers are fiscally stressed, and you have to emphasize the promotional aspect, there are times when you need to do that. The danger obviously is that you you have to keep reminding people about the values and the symbolism that make the brand seem authentic and linked to your values, that create that initial love for the brand. So I think if a brand skews too much in the promotion activation side and sort of cheapens and loses the heritage, the emotional linkage, then you run the danger. You can do that for a short time, but if you do it for too long, it's a very competitive marketplace. Other brands are always competing with you for mind share or heart share. Then it's going to damage your brand long term. But it's a judgment. There's nothing more than I can really say on that. You need both.
I mean, on the flip side, if you take like a brand that does not say have that emotional connect, if it's like a fledgling brand, do you think that it would be a stretch to start doing the sort of emotional connect that a love mark brand can do? If you're just like a small brand starting out, do you start off doing performance marketing, or do you recommend like brands like this also start trying to emotionally engage with their audience?
Well, I've often felt, this is sort of going broader than the talk, that brands first need to create, communicate, and prove superiority on the functional value side before you begin marketing on the emotional side. I think it's very dangerous to start with the emotional side if you don't already have the credibility on the functional value side. So I think you need to start on that. Now, that doesn't mean it has to be in sequence and that you do not talk about the emotional element, but the brand needs to have and the consumer needs to perceive the quality and the value element before they resonate with the emotional side. So I think it's dangerous to just begin with an emotional appeal if you're vulnerable on the quality value side, especially in a market like India, where consumers are so value driven that I doubt that a brand that wins on emotion but loses on value is going to make it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Vijay, I think Anu Vaza has a very important question.
Shankar, can you request Anu to ask a question, please? Can you open the unmuter? Anu, please go ahead with your question.
Just a second, sir. Anu ma'am, you can unmute now.
Sorry about it there.
No problem. Thank you, Mr. Balram, for the permission. Professor Dr. Batra, it's an enthralling presentation, but I'm completely astonished that social responsibility doesn't seem to fit into this dialogue at all, especially in some cultures. Probably Europe has more social responsibility factored in, maybe the United States doesn't. But I don't think that's the point. I think the point is, where do you see this trend going? More and more is being expected of companies in this sphere, and this doesn't figure into cool.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we found that showing up in our European qualitative data, but it did not show up in the North American qualitative and quantitative data. And so I fully acknowledge what you're saying, that it may be more prominent in some cultures. It may be more prominent today than it was even 5 years ago. And it certainly may be more prominent among certain demographic groups than others. So everybody these days in marketing and branding talks about brand purpose, which links to CSR. What is the brand's reason for existence? But that's another conversation. I mean, I think brand purpose has been overstated in terms of the payback, and I wonder if Prabha can speak to that, or others. But so I share instinctively what you're saying, but it's not the only thing out there. There are lots of other criteria for the formation of brand love and brand coolness than just the CSR. But the weight could certainly be higher in certain specific demographics and categories and geographies.
Okay, thank you very much. Brand purpose was part of the component of my question in the first place. So maybe I can take it up with Prabha separately. Thank you so much.
Okay, yep, you're welcome.
Group captain, can you throw it open?
Sir?
General questions.
Any more, Professor? More presentations?
No, I'm prepared to just go to Q&A for the next 15 minutes and then wrap up.
Oh, okay. Then can you close the screen so that I know what all the raising questions? It will be easy for me.
All right.
Thank you for you. Thank you, sir. The number of questions that come, I also request all the participants to please share your questions only in the chat mode, because due to security reasons, we don't open up, because you know there are a lot of issues happening in Zoom. Let me Mr. Ravi, President MMA is also there. Ravi, you are there. I seen a question from you. Ravi, President MMA. Welcome. Mr. Ravi Purushottam, the President MMA, is also the President of Danfoss. Mr. Balraman, with your permission, can I ask Ravi to ask a question? He's put a couple of them in the chat box.
I think, Ravi, Group Captain, my question was, I think, asked by Mr. Neeraj. I think my question was around, is the same characteristics can be applied on a B2B business? That was one of the question. And the second one was around the valuation. I mean, cool brands, do they get much more valuation vis-a-vis others? And of course, I have one more question. And I mean, when I look at the kind of business I am in, sustainability is the core for everything. I mean, we are talking about circular economy, and this probably is not figuring any of the characteristics, or at least indicators. That was just a comment.
Yeah, and that ties into Anu's question earlier. So I'm sure that, as I said, that if you did the research today, depending on the geography and the demographics and the category, the sustainability element may be much higher. But it's not the only thing. So there's a lot more. There are many other avenues to creating brand love and brand coolness.
The number of questions that comes, they're all short. I tell you, the question is from Uma. Connection with brand and personality and love and marks. What does it make, sir? What does it mean?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And in fact, we did bring in brand personality explicitly into our model when we worked on the brand coolness piece. And there are obviously different measures of brand personality, different scales. One of them is the ARCA scale, which is used frequently, which has within it scales for excitement, sophistication, and so on. And so we use that as in what is known as correlates. So in other words, we measure that as brand coolness is correlated with, linked to the brand personality. And so we were able to actually show that brand coolness contributes above and beyond brand personality to the prediction of the outcomes that I talked about. So it was included in our analysis. That's my short answer.
Thank you, sir. And it's a great interest in the participants. We have more than 2,000 audience are watching this program live now. There's a question which is a little out of context. I won't say out of context, it's out of thing. He says, Mr. Manikandan want to know, please provide some tips to build cool personal brand to remain employable even after losing the job in COVID-19 times. To make it lively, to make the evening a little lighter. I thought your input will be really, really useful to so many of them who are really fear of losing the job during the present time.
Well, I think if you take the scales, the components that we have, the 10 pieces of brand coolness, and if you just transform the wording from brand to a person to the individual, I think you get lots of good ideas. If you can show yourself to be super useful, way and above the average, doing something very distinctive, example. So I think with slight modification, you should get lots of ideas from those pieces.
Sure, sir. Stay cool and stay away from Corona. You'll be better off. So there's a question from Mr. Jagarajan. Does it mean coolness, a measure, is more applicable for early stages, I think like STAR, BCG, parlance, after the introduction of the brand? as the business tend to look at the value of brand with long lasting, high market share, high sales potential, etc. once they become the cash cow as per the BCG. What's your view on this?
So I think this is echoed with some of the questions that came earlier.
Yes.
And I think, yes, it is certainly true that there are many brands that are more cool in their younger years than there are in their later years. But that's because the brand doesn't manage coolness well. And that's why I think Nike is a fantastic example of a brand which is continuously managed its coolness. So not only does it not stop innovating in terms of product features and aesthetic design, but also in terms of symbolism and the types of spokespeople that the brand links itself to. Every few years, it re-looks and reconnects with those people, those spokespeople who at that time are especially symbolic of the values that Nike wants to be linked to, such as the autonomy, rebelliousness angle that's been a perennial theme in Nike branding. So it requires very smart managers to do that. So it's not inevitable that a big brand loses coolness. It does happen often, but it's not inevitable. Smart brand management can take care of that.
There's a question from a YouTube viewer. He says the role of digital is increasing and will have a strong impact in the new normal world. How, as a brand, can we ready to pivot this path?
Well, more and more you see both new brands and existing brands leveraging the digital platforms to create the kinds of associations they want for themselves, not just gain visibility and popularity. And I mentioned a brand like Glossier, which is a cosmetics brand in the direct-to-consumer space. But even Under Armour has used, digital media massively. So whether it's YouTube or Instagram, everybody's doing that. And by using these influencers who have these perceptions that you want your brand to be connected to, somebody mentioned personality earlier in a question. These are ways in which you continue and build and maintain, the coolness for your brand and create the love for the brand. So there's nothing intrinsically different, I think, with digital media, other than perhaps you're using not the established old type of celebrities. Maybe Amitabh Bachchan is not the person to use on Instagram. I don't know. But everyone's talking about these, smaller influencers and micro influencers that are the people that get tapped for these new social media.
Vijay,
yes, sir.
I think Neeraj Chandra has a question.
Yes, please. One last question which has come, sir. It looks interesting. If it's the permission, Mr. Balraman.
Sure.
Is it the question? Is it possible to love brand in category of products or service that don't make a difference to one's lives?
I think so. Doesn't make a difference to your life. You don't have to be, 50,000 rupee smartphone to be a loved brand. I mentioned Amul butter. I mean, does it make a big difference in your life? You can get butter from other companies, and yet people love that brand. So I certainly think that you can, I believe, and some people may disagree, but I believe that you can actually love a brand in a category that other people would consider trivial and not of high consequence. But I would love to hear what other people have to say, to what Prabha and Kannan and Neeraj and others have to say about that.
Thank you, sir. Now, yes,
Vijay,
Mr. Balraman, please go.
Neeraj wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, in fact, I think, Rajeev, your point is very valid. And when one starts looking at this like a positive trait which is socially constructed and not under the limitations of word cool, because the word cool takes us in a particular direction, you get really powerful interpretations which are valid across a wide spectrum of brands.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Therefore, that definition really opens it up and liberates it. The other thing which I found very interesting, on which I have a question for you, equally, our conventional way of thinking is this is led by emotions and this is led by advertising, etc., etc. But the levers for influencing brand coolness, quote unquote, are very many around. And really, they can be applied with such greater degree of impact around far beyond brands which are conventionally advertised. So I feel that brands like Amazon don't advertise so much, yet they manage to get across a certain degree of brand love. Any views on that?
That's a fabulous observation. I think the biggest growth that I had as a marketer and a brand builder was the insight that a brand communicates in ways that go far beyond the advertising. I was in fact talking once to the global brand manager for Sony, and I asked him what piece of marketing communication made Sony such a strong brand. And he looked at me and said, it was not marketing communication at all, it was product communication. And so if you broaden your lens to say, how does a brand communicate? It communicates through, first and foremost, through its products or services. The product design, the user experience. I mean, Apple is so fabulous, and Amazon, you brought up Amazon. So the user experience, that's what creates the coolness and the love. It's not the advertising. The advertising is a very, very, very small part of what builds these brand perceptions. The biggest change in brand management thinking, in my view, is that you have to stop thinking that brands are built through advertising. That's not the case. Brands are built through 360-degree communication that the consumer has with your brand, the interaction, the communication. And that happens through all these other touch points. We talk about the customer experience journey. You know, how is the consumer interacting with your brand? Can you map each step? What is the message we're giving at each step, each interaction? That's how your brand perceptions are being shaped. And so you as the brand manager need to reshape each of those touch points to create the brand perceptions you want to create, which will then lead to brand coolness and brand love.
No, it's fascinating. Thanks, Ray. Thank you.
Vijay, shall I close the meeting because he wanted to leave by 7:30?
Yes, sir. Please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Steve. I think a brand's coolness is decided by the brand's behavior, I think, which is what you said. It's a 360 integrated communication. Whatever a brand does, whatever it doesn't do, both by the positives and negatives, and you know, how it changes, how it doesn't change. Everything communicates something about the brand. So it's a brand behavior. A brand is very much like a human persona, to my way of thinking, which is what gives me a great interest in marketing, because you can never predict. When something is very unpredictable, it is fascinating to watch. And may I say that as a professor of marketing, you are a very cool brand. Your presentation today was totally unpredictable. It's something I didn't anticipate. When you talked of a cool brand and brand love, I was expecting something else. And very pleasantly surprised. And that we didn't have time for the third part of your communication. I do hope that we will find some other opportunity to do this. Very, very, very good to reconnect with you, Rajeev, after so many years. After how many years? 20, almost 40 years. Huh?
Yes, don't say that. Don't age both of us. But, well, I will say thank you very much for the opportunity. It was great to be in touch with all of you to share some of the work. And for me, it's a way of connecting with my own personal history. You know, I think very fondly of the years, not just at Ponds, but in Chennai, in Madras. I used to live very close to Falgun Mansion in Egmore. And I think of those 2 years with great fondness. So I hope to see some of you in person next time I'm in Chennai, COVID permitting.
We look forward to that. We will host you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, sir. Look forward to, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That will come to bring an end of this. Look forward to seeing you again next MMA event. There's a feedback form which you are given. Take a minute and just fill it up. It will be very, very important for us. Thank you so much, and we appreciate your support and appreciate your understanding. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Balraman. I think we should do the part 2 later. I think we have a couple of dates which is vacant. You can request him to do that actually.
Okay.
Way forward. I'll leave it to you on that.
Thank you.
It's a good response to this. Even more than 2,000 participants. Good feedback we got.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and
thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll call you and
satisfied.
Yes. Excellent. A lot of questions and good. I'll just call you to brief you on something. I'll just call you, Mr. Balraman, on the landline. Okay. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Good night, and thank you for your understanding and sharing your feedback form. Until we meet again, bye-bye. Take care. Stay safe, stay healthy, and good night. Good night. Thank you so much.
Right.